Let's get into some Daredevil stuff. That's next up on the list. Is some Daredevil stuff. Perhaps you guys have seen Entertainment Weekly is doing a big spread on the Daredevil show this week. So let's take a look at this article they dropped yesterday. Pretty cool stuff. How Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio got Daredevil Born Again back on track. Plus, showrunner Dario Scardapane explains how the two stars crafted that unexpected moment of levity from the preview footage. Charlie Cox has unfinished business in Hell's Kitchen. 6 years ago, the actor had just wrapped up his third season of playing Marvel's blind superhero, Daredevil, and he was getting ready for the fourth when he took some unexpected bad news. Season 3 had been well received, and they had already gone to work on Season 4. They'd pitched me a really cool arc for the season, Cox tells Entertainment Weekly. My understanding was that they were really heavy into breaking that season in the writer's room, and then just overnight, it went away. As the years passed, Cox became sure that he would never get the chance to don the red suit again. But then came a 2020 call from Kevin Feige. Cox had rarely interacted with the MCU's chief architect before, since Daredevil and its adjacent shows had been made part of the short-lived partnership with Netflix, overseen by former Marvel television head Jeff Loeb. But now, Feige wanted to incorporate Cox's Matt Murdock's and his nemesis Kingpin, a.k.a. Vincent D'Onofrio, into the proper MCU. First, with small cameos in Spider-Man No Way Home and She-Hulk, and then D'Onofrio was sure that their own TV revival was on the horizon, and Cox called him crazy. But now the two are suiting up once again for the next year's Daredevil Born Again. Kingpin is having the last laugh. I never thought it would be a TV show again. I just assumed that we'd done that. So maybe it would be something else, Cox says. So I was shocked when they told me in 2022 that we were going to do a show, but I was also thrilled. It's such a great medium for this character. There is so much story left to tell. So the more time we have to do that, the better. I tend to agree. I think Daredevil is perfect for the television format. To be clear, when Daredevil Born Again premieres on Disney Plus this coming March, it won't just be a rehash of the original plans for Season 4, which resolved more around the show's connection to the Defenders, which so far has not been resurrected alongside it. Time has passed, and the creative personnel has changed as well. In fact, showrunner Dario Scardapane wasn't even brought in until after last year's Hollywood strikes in order to retool and revamp after it had gotten off track. Now, we'll stop for a second. This is relevant. Vince. I'm about the bus. This is relevant to what we were talking about before, right? Marvel was thinking they could do this without showrunners. It's not that he was brought in as the showrunner after this. It's that they didn't even have a showrunner. Okay? They didn't even have a goddamn showrunner. So remember, there's that Tatiana Maslany article about the creative overhaul. They go home Roger, everybody, they fire all the writers. They only use like one episode out of whatever they had shot. And this is when Scardapane is brought in. Now, I believe he was the showrunner on the Punisher shows over on Netflix. But I just wanted to stop there for a second because what we were talking about with the Nova show, that's relevant to this. For him being brought on for the revamp specifically. That's relevant. It had been conceived as more of a legal procedural, and we really brought it back towards an action-based New York crime story, Scardapane tells EW. The real trick was to have the DNA of the old Netflix show, but then to push it forward into something new. So that's crazy. A legal procedural, so more like Law and Order. I mean, I don't know. Let's read on. I have thoughts, though. After that, Cox and D'Onofrio had waited years to return to these roles together. They knew what their fans wanted, and they fought to make sure Daredevil wouldn't be sanitized just because it would now stream on Disney Plus rather than Netflix. The thing that we kept talking about was this show has had the success that it's had and has appealed to very specific demographics because it's one of the few superhero shows that is so dark and sinister at times, Cox says. Vincent and I both felt like if you lose that, you are at risk of losing the identity of our show. So we really pushed hard for the show to remain geared towards the older audience and not dumbed down to kind of capture a wider net of people. I think in some ways it's even darker than a lot of stuff we have done in the past. That's really interesting. I think he's probably speaking to some of the concepts and the ideas of the Muse character. I don't want to go into full spoiler details here. We've talked about this before. Interestingly, during one of our deep dive streams with the members, we watched a panel where Charles Soule, who was the guy that wrote the Devil's Reign run and all this stuff with like Fisk being the mayor and everything like that, created the Muse character. He kind of hints at talking about this stuff with Marvel Studios, being consulted and helping to craft how that character would arrive in live action. Muse is maybe one of the most twisted and dark characters we have ever seen in Marvel. Fascinated to see what that looks like in the Daredevil show. Let me just say this. There will be blood. In fact, Cox says that Daredevil Born Again gets so intense that there was some debate over what footage might be tame enough to include in the sizzle reel teaser of Marvel's 2025 output. The end result was a snippet of Murdock and Fisk sharing a laugh in a diner in its own way that was more shocking than even the most violent fight scene. Yeah, I agree. According to Scartapan, that moment came purely from Cox and D'Onofrio. Not just the storied relationship between the characters, but also their own real-life history as stewards of this franchise. I am so ridiculously proud of that moment where they share a chuckle, the showrunner says. It was not in the original scene. They came in, sat down, and were talking about it, and one of them was like, there needs to be a moment of levity. But we realized it had to be messed up levity. We built that moment through rehearsal and improv. It was a round robin, and it became the center of that scene. That was them. How these two grind against each other is 100% the engine of that story. No Diddy. We're doing a couple of really different things this season that have not been done even in 40 years of comics. In addition to those two stars, Daredevil Born Again will also see John Bernthal, Deborah Ann Woll, Eldon Henson reprise the roles from the original series as Frank Castle, Karen Page, and Foggy Nelson. We'll find out more about what they have in store for Daredevil Born Again premieres Tuesday, March 4th on Disney+. So, you know what's kind of interesting about this is it feels like a little bit of spin, right? A little bit of spin, which, you know, I'm not trying to say it's all wrong, but it feels like a little bit of spin because considering the Tatiana Maslany article, considering some of the stuff we heard about the show, how it was going, this is different. I mean, they don't really address the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is that somehow, some way, Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios thought it was a good idea to take these iconic actors in these iconic roles and do something completely different than what had worked before. Now, again, credit where credit is due. Kevin and company took a look at that show. They watched the dailies. They watched some of the episodes cut together, and they said, this is fucking trash. This is so bad. We have to fire everybody that's currently working on this show and remake it completely. And I think, like, to be honest with you, I think that's maybe one of the best decisions Marvel Studios has ever made. Period. And I think we will see the fruit of that decision bared next year and also in the years after. Because the reports are that the second season of Daredevil Born Again will start shooting next year as well. Possibly be ready for 2025. So that's like incredible news. It's kind of an incredible story just about the show itself really happening at a literally and figuratively pivotal time for the studio. And I think it's great. Now, this article kind of talks about how Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio were important shepherds of what that change should look like. This new showrunner, who again was the showrunner on the Punisher show, coming in and realizing what that thing should be like. big collaborative effort. Kumbaya. We obviously have a little bit more context because we follow it quite closely. But regardless of all of that, man, I think they're cooking something incredible with Daredevil. They can't exactly hide that they recreated the show. According to this article, it was going to be a legal procedural show. Very different than what we had seen in the Netflix show. Now, the DNA of the old Netflix show, that grittiness, that darkness, that has been carried over into the new version of the show. So there you have it. I'm excited. Wanted to talk about this article. Wanted to give you a little bit more context. This is, of course, Marvel's sort of effort to get that story out there in a way that's controlled for them, in a way that will get the fans excited. But I think even if you're being kind of a dick, even if you're looking at this through a very negative lensing and you really want to harp on Marvel for having the, really bad idea of making this show a very different originally, I think even if you want to be bad faith, you'd have to still give credit because they did change it. And now it does seem like this is going to be crazy. Highly anticipated show.